the plan was to kind of go through your digital presence and real time set that up. But you've been away this week, so what have you been up to?
I've been in UK. I was due to record a podcast, and then I was in Amsterdam yesterday.
Okay, was the podcast a clothing brand related podcast or something completely different?
It was tennis related, but we would have covered clothing as well because the guy is from the States. He's an ambassador for a sports brand, and he has his own tennis brand / club, like the running Club Boon, but he's done that for tennis. So they have a thing going on in I'm going to say Chicago and LA, and he has also his clothing label. So he didn't know that was my background because we were talking
really?
to talk about tennis.
Interesting.
And then we got on to Portugal when we had a phone call, and he was like, I didn't know you were doing that. So yeah, seems to be that serendipity, calls, etc.
You know, it would be really interesting to see what happened with that or with something else. There's I can't remember the name of the company now, but for a long time I was really inspired by a furniture company that did furniture for offices, and I think it was in the UK that they started, and then because they did the furniture for an agency, and the agency had offices in London and in LA. So they were like, we want everything to be on brand, we want everything to be the same. So can you make the furniture for our LA office? And then, of course, when they looked into shipping it from the UK over to LA, the cost of it, ramped it up by twice as much. And so instead of saying, okay, well, we can't do that, or shipping it and therefore taking the CO2 footprint into account with that because it was a sustainable company, instead they found partners around the world that they could work with, and they had their plans, just as we would do a tech pack, but I think more specific, like really, CAD designed and right down to the millimeter. And then they would find factories that were creating furniture, laser cutting furniture. And they found one in LA, and they kind of have then expanded out. So you can buy their furniture and it's made locally, even though it's from a UK company, which I think is a really interesting idea. And I could imagine it happening with especially with Brexit. If I make stuff in the UK, sending it over to Europe, there's significant costs to account for there. Whereas if I made the orders for European customers in Portugal, then you could offset some of that.
Yeah, I think everyone probably has a similar idea. I always thought that when we were in previous life with Album, about expanding into the States and then doing a similar thing, because most of the fabrics that you use, denim, jersey, etc., they can be made all over the world, and they'll have a slightly different handwriting, so you can have a global or one aesthetic but produced in different places. And we never did the cost exercise, actually, because it never got there. But I'd be interested to know if, well, it can work, but you then encounter the same problems that you do to start with for making in the UK. When you've got one factory sorted, then you move it to the next, even though they're copying it, even though fabrics, but then also minimums. Like you then get into all of that. So I'm sure it would work, I think, if there are some things that are set up already. Like that you're going to achieve the minimum, so there's not then that burden. Because to add on an extra 50 units on your existing production is no problem, but to then start to make another 300 and QC all that, you end up with those problems. I always like the idea. I think it's quite cool. It makes all the product the same but different.
I think you have to be of a certain scale, because I think that you do need to double up, for instance, as you like with the quality control, and you need to have someone project managing in both places. Customer returns. You'd have to have returns being dealt with by somebody. So you are you're maybe not entirely doubling up your team, but there are certain roles that you would have to double up, and then you'd be obviously going back and forth to make sure everything was done to the same standard. So yeah, so I think it's a scale thing. It's something that I'd like to imagine that I would get to at a point. But then again, my whole USP is made in Great Britain. So perhaps for Barnfield it wouldn't work, but I do like it as a concept.
Yeah, and that's probably a point we can touch on about provenance and country. Having done this for so long, I believe it's not irrelevant. It's a difficult one. Sort of almost irrelevant where it's made, because at the end of the day, my experience has been that the people that are really into where something's made, they tend not to be the ones that will pay what is required to make that in the place. You know, they're kind of like the spotters, and I love them. And you know, they're the ones that will stand in a store for hours, or when stores are there, and just talk about clothes. And then when it comes to it, I remember having those conversations with guys. One in particular, he was with us for like 3 hours afternoon, and he'd come in like every Wednesday, talking about denim, and then and actually where his jeans were from weren't in any way related to all the stuff that he was really into. So it was always like, oh yeah, like and there are exceptions to the rule and that prove the rule, but you just never know. But making it like the thing about this is made in this place, I don't know, because you will get to a scale where that global events happen that are out of your control, and the factories that are existing just close. It's just like untenable for whatever reason. Yeah. Then what do? Do you close the business, or do you then move it? So, which goes not against, but it changes tack of that thing, and then over time it will be forgotten about. But at that moment, it's like there'll be a drop off.
Especially if it's been your USP, and I think that's where, for me, it's an important part of the story, but it's not the only part of the story. So the reason I am focused on it is being based in the UK. I don't think I can then complain about it being difficult or not having the factories here to make things if I'm not then supporting them in whatever way I can. Now, obviously, the figures that I'm doing are not massive, but it's the concept that's there. And I think that, if it got to that point where it was completely untenable, I think given that that's the reasoning behind it, I think it would, if you could, justifiably demonstrate that it just wasn't possible to do it, then that's fine.
And and that's a story in itself, that becomes the thing that you can then talk about, and and then you found
true.
And then it does make it almost, again, that kind of, it doesn't really matter, because you dress the story, you're always dressing this, well, it's a story, isn't it?
And it has to come down to, it has to be quality first. You can't say this is made in England and it be utter dog shit, because it just doesn't matter. And there's no question that where you are over in Porto, there has been that investment into the textiles industry. So if you're looking to do things to a very high quality, then it would be mad not to look at Portugal.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I agree. You can say that about everywhere. I think you can say it about China. There's amazing, incredible factories in China. I've felt it important. Like now, being based in Portugal, I'm just looking at kind of manifestos that I've written on the wall. But the place that I'm in, it's important to make in that place. That's how I feel about garments. Sure. And maybe where you are, because if you were still in Bahrain, it would be going, what, if there are makers there, there's a local thing going on. Yeah, and then but there are some things, like I think about knitwear, for example. the way that knitwear is made in England and Scotland, I think, is more authentic. I think it's better than knitwear necessarily made in China. Is it better? You have to work harder, because the reason why Scottish cashmere, or one of the reasons, is it's so good, and the way it's finished, and the water quality and the water softness. So you could take the same raw material from the same spinner, put it to two different countries, but when you wash it, it's sort of like washing your hair. You can wash your hair in London and it'll feel one way. You can wash your hair in, Nottingham or in a mountain stream and it'll feel a different way, and one will be softer and one will be drier. Or it's the same with garments. So then that comes across in the product.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and especially, as you say, the authenticity there, or having to work that much harder to kind of recreate the natural environment that's going on in Scotland, trying to recreate it in China.
Yeah, which you just can't do.
Sure. Yeah.
So then you have to work not extra hard, but you have to work at it, like making lovely, great factories with nice machinery here, or nice factories with nice machinery here. Thinking specifically about knitwear, that's just then becomes all these little things, but for some people they're not important. It's just like it's a garment. The yarn is, they wouldn't necessarily feel the difference between the two. But having been in England, which did feel, and I'm sad to say, but it did feel like it was on its arse last week. It was certainly where I was, the city where I was, and I went into the main retailer for designer gear in the UK, really, the big one that's taking over, and it was just like, I can't. It was weird. It was like there was nothing special about anything. The most special thing, eye-watering thing, was the prices of things delivered in such a way that made you feel, it almost felt cruel to the person buying it, as though you're a mug buying this for this price here, like, but you don't have an option. But there was no celebration of a jumper costing £1,000. But it's £1,000. It's £1,000. And that is a lot of money. So the only thing, it was just like real base value stuff, and seemed to take away all the charm. And I was like, gosh, there are real opportunities for retailers and brands to come in with something that make people feel a certain way, and it is special.
Experience, hey?
Yeah.
And this is obviously, being involved in digital for as long as I have, I've seen, England is this, because everything's so tightly packed, it's the death of the high street has been accelerated by the ease of e-commerce delivery. Because, at the same time, you've had, Nottingham's a perfect example, right? I think to park, if I park in the city centre, you can park in the train station, it's a little bit cheaper. If I park in the city centre, go into the lace market, a couple of hours, £17. 3 hours, I'm looking like £30. So, you've got to add £30, plus it's however much in fuel to get there. Then when you're there, as you say, things are so feel so down and out. You have little pockets, really beautiful little pockets, but generally across the board, it feels on its arse, as you say. You've got the Broadmarsh Centre that's been half knocked down, and then they've stopped. I think they're slowly doing parts of it, but they kept on getting knocked back for government support. So where you've got Leeds, that's really, come of its own, Liverpool, of course, even Sheffield, Nottingham really kind of got left behind. And it's indicative of lots of cities in the country. but where you've got that additional right. So I'm going to spend, let's say, £40 between fuel, let's say £50 between fuel, parking, coffee to go into the city centre for one person. Stick a family on that, you're ramping that up just to go to the city centre. Then you've got the fact that, of course, the stores don't hold anywhere near the stock that an e-commerce store with a warehouse can. So I want my, Air Force Ones, and I want them in red with blue tongues, and I can get that online, and I can get it delivered within 3 days max. I'll probably get it delivered the next day because everything's so close, and probably free postage, free returns as well. So all of that stuff has really ramped up the acceleration of the death of the high street, because the only way to differentiate yourself is to provide experience. And the only organizations that can provide some sort of really entertaining experience that doesn't matter if someone then doesn't go on to buy anything is your large big box, your Nikes or whoever. Like, those are the guys who can afford to have a retail space as marketing. Of course, if you're an independent, you need people buying stuff from you each and every day if you're paying whatever the rates are that just go through the roof. So the city centres have not helped themselves at all. They need to subsidise parking. They need to improve the experience across the board. They need to subsidise rents and rates to get more people in there. Need to do their own marketing, all that stuff.
I never realised how expensive. I mean, obviously, because I lived where I lived when I was in Nottingham, so we'd just always walk. But I never realised it was that expensive now. That's nuts. I mean, we were in Amsterdam and we went to buy some water, and you can tell that it's a tourist place, and Amsterdam just seems busier than it ever has been. And in parts, has always been gross, but in parts, it's really beautiful. And the Dutch, I think do things very well. But we bought like 2 bottles of water, and it was like €11, and you're like, oh, it's either you see people coming and then everyone's out to get it, which I get. I understand that, but I guess it's just finding the ways. And we've been looking at photoshoots and costs of that, doing that, and then we've actually kind of taken not a U-turn, but gone, okay, everything feels like it's getting too big and out of control. You start to ask, established people what they would do, and you kind of default back onto the comfort blanket, and then all of a sudden the production's got like 20 people involved.
This is for you to do a photo shoot for Peace.
This is for us to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you end up with it just so cumbersome financially, and then you look at all the brands that people are certainly. So we were in Amsterdam talking to a big sports brand about doing stuff with them independently, because it's another business that I am involved with. Obviously, they have the budgets to do those things, but then they reference the brands that are dynamic and young and agile that do it on half a shoestring. They're not even doing it on a shoestring. They're kind of self-shooting, putting it together. Those brands are growing, and people want to replicate that, but replicate a $5,000 shoot or less, shot on iPhones, edited on the fly overnight, put out, and it's like, oh my God, isn't that amazing? And they're like, okay, we need sort of 50 people. It needs to do this, this, and this, and you're at like 250,000 before you even.
Well, and also, of course, with those organisations, approvals as well. So it might be edited overnight, it might be ready to go, but it's got to go through 10 different people before it gets sanitized, before it goes out. And so we'll come back, I will come back, but this is what I was talking about if you are a founder-led small business doing something interesting, you have a superpower in that dynamism, in that you can be front and center, and you can show the authenticity and the transparency of, I'm living the life that I'm selling here, and you can do exactly that. You can film on an iPhone, you can edit, and you can get it out. I I question whether it's entirely possible. I think for most brands it's fine. I question whether it works within the premium / luxury area. I struggle with that. Whether people are still, I think we've already spoken about this, but whether people are still expecting that high production value, or whether it's just a matter of, because they still want the authenticity, and the social media algorithms are going to push that and restrict the fantasy stuff, that the high quality branded stuff. You're literally just not going to get in front of people. So I think it's about mixing it somehow. And there's actually, no, this is what we were talking about having your founder story and your founder led stuff going out on your personal social media accounts, and your branded stuff, high value, high quality stuff, staying on your brand primarily.
Yeah. Have you seen like the luxury brands like Loewe have done this? They're self-shooting and shooting lots on iPhone. And like Loewe, the creative director, Jonathan Anderson, they did a campaign recently, and it was him and a stylist shooting on iPhone. Like really beautiful production values, but kind of them shooting it like in and on, and it became the major campaign. Obviously they had an amazing stylist, they had him, and they had great set builders. There was still this luxury production element to it, but the reality was, we're doing it like at the so it kind of shortened the gap between the creative mind and the output, which was nice. But there was always that thing of, it's got slick production. It has, there's been a certain budget spent on the stylist, the studio, the quality of the product as well speaks for itself.
Yeah, and it's still aspirational then, isn't it? It's still aspirational. You're just filming it on a platform that makes it more accessible, as if you're fly on the wall a little bit more.
Yeah, and something when we were at Album talking about all this, because in a way we were pre-social. Instagram had just come about, but it was for us, and still now actually, it's putting the right medium on the right platform. And after our conversations, then going through the shoots, so the piece shoot, we're actually looking to Portugal, and serendipitously I was invited to play some paddle with a friend, and then two of the guys that were also playing. I was like, I need to speak to you about a photographer, and one of them was a great photographer from the UK. Met him, and he said there's a really good infrastructure here. You kind of miss certain bits, because they've not got necessarily the eye, but when you've got a good foundation here, that if you add the extra bits of like a good photographer, stylist, which we've already got in the mix, you can output something for better value.
I'd imagine Portugal would be beautifully set for in terms of like the locations and everything. For
locations are great, studios too. I'm going to go and look around a couple this week. So yes, but you need to know about those, and then when you're in the thick of it, say if you're designing a brand in Nottingham, you don't necessarily see those things. So because you're in Nottingham, aren't you? And then you're with the confines of that, and then it's like, thinking about moving. We've got to fly people out. You end up with all of these limitations, but they can, if you can think about it small enough, I think. And then what are the bits that are really important? Like just pull it all the way back. Whereas that retailer seemed to destroy everything that was really important, other than high value, cheap. Like pay people low, sell it high, which is it's a great model if you can do it, but doesn't necessarily translate through.
You have to provide so much transparency and so much authenticity with what your marketing portrays with the brand. I just don't think you can get away with it anymore. Sure, there's going to be some brands that have already kind of established themselves and are just selling prints on very cheap t-shirts. But I think that as a newer brand, you don't have that freedom anymore.
I don't know. I think maybe it's the age of the customer. Like the older you are, the more you know, the more
skeptical you are.
The more naturally skeptical you become, and then the younger ones are still like, oh no, but they've said this, or this is the thing, and this is, because you do view it differently, don't you? I remember viewing products differently, and my dad being like, why would you pay that for that?
Yeah, because of what it says and what other people have said about it, and
exactly, and it, so I think age has a lot to do with it, and then you're in this twilight age of purchases at our age, that early 40s. There are more things preying on that, aren't there? There's mortgage, there's kids, there's which that younger gen, it's really, do I look good in this on a, when I go out and do the thing that I'm going to do? So it's different, I will.
Yeah, and I remember listening to a podcast from John Marsh, who I've mentioned before, over in Oz, and he was talking about how when those pressures are higher on the finances, your moves have more status associated with it within your relationships. So if he goes and spends $5,000 on a new trials bike and then comes home with it and is like, hey, check this out, to his wife, and she's like, we needed to buy this, this, and this for the house or for the kids, then he is immediately very low status in the relationship by having made that decision. And so there's more on the line to those decisions. Whereas when you're a young guy or a young girl or whatever, it's just like, I'm making those decisions. The only thing that matters is the status within my friendship group.
Yeah. So I think like doing something at our age is, you have to be able to embrace a mindset of being young, because it can so easily limit. Like I've noticed in conversations, everything can become out of bounds, because there's you speak to a photographer that you might have known when you were young, and before it's like, let's just do it, and can't afford that, we'll do this, and then it becomes like, well, I need this and this and this and this. It's like, you don't really need it, you want it because there's like a status thing. It's like, well, I only produce shoots that are this, and you're like, cool, let's not do it then, because we can't, because it's 100,000 before you
and the budget isn't there. So
And it goes up because of your expectation of what you can do, or what is possible, and what you should be doing at the age that you're at with the people that you want to buy your product. And then I'm going to do it better than it's ever done before, but that comes at a cost. Or there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. You need to like pick those things that you can then do well, rather than fighting everything on all fronts, and almost shoot a really good campaign but never actually shoot it. You just do behind the scenes. And that's just come to me now. Like, you got all this mood board, this is where we want to go. These are going to be the billboard campaigns. Well, you're never going to do it as a young brand unless you've got squillions. But from what you're saying, it's founder-led stuff, authentic stuff. That's the thing that people engage with, which really means behind the scenes footage of the shoot that you're doing. Well, one of the most expensive parts of that is the photographer and the setup. But the people looking at TikTok don't really know what goes in that setup. So you can put anything in that setup, and you're just doing... You're kind of going through the motions, but you're shooting what you're shooting. If we were to do a shoot, it would look like this, but you're not going to see the end result, because you're going to interact with it in a different way. You're going to interact with it in a TikTok way.
Well, it could, because what's the end result then? Because I was going to say that could feel kind of inauthentic, but it's not. Depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. If the end result is a photo shoot, and a campaign that goes on, as you say, on billboards, magazines, or whatever, then that's that. But if it's an exercise in making stuff look, making the brand look a certain way, and being able to represent it, how can we do it, for instance, on a shoestring with an iPhone? Well, we've got to go back to basics. We can't set up in a studio and light it to look like it's outside. We have to look and see when's golden hour. Right, we need to get down to the beach at this time. We need to set up at this time, and maybe we can use some aluminium foil as a reflector, or whatever. How can you do it to get those results?
Yeah, but do you need the? I think my point is, do you need the output that you start off with?
Well, I guess I see it from the perspective of having done this stuff and spending so much time on it at the moment. You would want it anyway, since you're there, since you're putting in the effort.
But it
you
could
would
be the
producing
difference
something.
It could be the difference of we're going to use that photographer and that studio, and that's an additional 10 grand, or you just go, great, we'll get some good models, and style it, and the product's good, but no one's ever going to see the final result. Which I can't take these off the wall because I'll peel the paint off because the masking tape's old. But like the reference is that. Because it's never going to go to Billboard, that image. But you do everything, which then has a subsequent cost because it's all going to live on TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's a good point because there's this whole, and we've spoken about this before. This whole idea of the brand is dead. I don't entirely agree with that because I think that there needs to be a platform. It's kind of like people, when social media first appeared, people were like, well, do I still need a website? And it's like, yes, you still need a website because you still need a home and a hub for your brand. And then social goes off that because also what happens if you invest everything into Instagram and then they ban you? And then you're completely lost. So you need, you can't have all your eggs in one basket. But I get what you're saying because we're talking about this founder-led stuff, which is day in the life, fly on the wall, sort of documentary style stuff. And that's what's grabbing people's attention. That's what's getting engagement. And then you're posting your costly kind of like campaigns and products onto your brand's page on social media, and it's getting bugger all engagement. So it's almost like, why do it at all? I'm with you with that concept. I still feel like there's something missing. Like it's almost like the story isn't then complete unless you do have this end result. I mean, I guess.
Well, I think then that also, I think the clothing might be that. It also sees it as everything has to be complete straight away, and it doesn't necessarily, because you don't really know. Like you'll build up to it. Because really it's about generating cash. We're all doing this to make money, which is really profit rather than turnover. So you can hype it up, you can sell it for really cheap. If there's no profit there, it's not going to last. That's not sustainable. So you're driving this idea, and all it is an idea. But you don't, like, you can get to it. It might be in 3 months' time we're going to then redo that shoot because we'll have generated the income that will allow us to do it. Like, there's never an end point. Yeah. You're just moving through stages that you're documenting and showing for where you are to inspire people to buy it. And 3 months goes so fast, but you can also sell a lot of product in 3 months, which can change where you are at that time. You can also not sell it. And we were thinking about, my experience of seeing people do photo shoots for small brands or for starting brands. Yes, photographers for small businesses.
Or just your experience with them.
My experience is that you put it all in. You go, photo shoot is really important. I'm going to spend all my money on this first one. And I had a really good bit of advice by a chap that we didn't get on very well in the end, but he gave me, he was always like, what's steps 2 and 3? Like when you're doing step 1, you need step 2 and 3 done, because you never know how, like, you'll go to step 2 and step 3, but you never know how quickly. And the worst thing is to be caught like on the hop and you haven't got steps 2 and 3 done. So like you need to kind of have them all planned out so you can execute them. And then
Do you mean done or prepared, or like thought about?
ready to go, because
Right,
you know
okay.
you could have that demand and people want, they're like, okay, cool, we've bought it, we want the next thing, and you're like, oh, that's going to take me another 8 months. Of which time you've got to keep them going for 8 months, and that can be a long time, and that's going to cost you as well. And because when the cash is flowing, you need to keep it flowing. So then, as a result of that, I was then like, okay, it's that MVP thing again, like, because people, they see what they see as the final thing, regardless, because it's what they see. You know,
Yeah.
they see every decision as the final decision that was made. You won't, or I won't, with your garment, you know, our garments, because oftentimes, particularly when it's the first one, you see all the things that aren't done that you couldn't afford to do, but no one else sees those things. They just take it because you're presenting it. It's finished. That's it. That's finished. And they either like it or they don't, and then they come back to it. Now, that's not saying that you can't, well, you don't have to do a photo shoot, but you need to have some other way of showing people what you've got. And that could be done by just taking a quick snap on your iPhone and then putting it up. And, you know, it's like, quick, buy these now, otherwise they're gone, and that will work for some things. But photo shoots tend to start with that. Like, this is how I want it to look. This is my big vision for how I want it to look. And it's really easy to not get there because you can't afford it. So you compromise somewhere lower down because you can't afford certain bits, so you scale it back rather than go, okay, we're not going to worry about what that end result's going to look like. There are some things that we need, and it might be a model, but we're going to shoot it all behind the scenes. So the model's going to come round to your space for casting, and they're going to try on garments, and you do it in such a way that you're like, oh wow, they're getting ready for this stuff. You can buy this stuff now. You take them on the whole journey, but it's not the final journey. And then it's because it might be in a year that those images come out, because I do question whether when you've done something you feel you need to do something again and again and again. I think that's the chase for brands, because they've put all their money into campaign 1 and they've got to do, well, campaign 1's out and we've seen those images for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, even a year, and we're bored of them, but they don't use them enough. Like, brands don't seem to use the campaign imagery enough because they think that everyone's seen it.
Yeah. And like probably 10% of the people following, let alone like the people who might be interested who've seen it.
And really, a great image is a great image, and great product is great product. It shouldn't be so timely that it's you know, it just can't be. So and that's just come to me now, and it's made me think about our shoots. Like, maybe you don't need to do it in the way that you thought you did, which is have this end result from the get-go, because that could be step 3 of those things. Like, first one is just behind the scenes, kind of founder-led, gearing up for this photo shoot. Product's ready to buy, because you're going to be selling that peacoat hopefully in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It might have evolved.
Sure.
But still the thing.
Yeah.
But does it have to be? Because really it should be, don't release anything until it's the final version. Now we're on iPhone 14, which has taken a long time, and there have been improvements, but the excitement for iPhone 1, for the iPod, was the same as the iPhone 1, probably less so as the iPhone 15. But you can have like 3.5 songs on the iPod, but it was the best thing ever.
Yeah. And also,
so I think you could stagger that.
I really don't believe in holding things back and then being like, launch, ta-da! Because who are you launching to? And what does it mean to those people? Especially as a clothing company, especially doing what I'm doing. Okay. The Lawrence jacket was unique to Barnfield, but it was a smart field jacket, you know. And now I'm going to be doing a peacoat, and there are certain elements of that will make it unique to Barnfield, but it's a peacoat. All of this stuff has been done before. So if you just go, here we go, here's my beautifully represented shots of a model wearing this peacoat. Well, what is to differentiate that shot? As I say, you can differentiate the jacket if you've been able to communicate those differences, but you can't differentiate the differences in a single shot. What's going to be different between my pea coat, a private white pea coat, or a Todd's pea coat? As far as the photo is concerned, we all have the capabilities to throw money at it, to do studio shots with models that are going to look exactly the same. But what can differentiate me from Todd's is the founder-led stuff, talking about why those decisions have been made, and not why I'm making the decisions for me, but why I'm making those decisions to create a product which is right for my target audience, which is going to engage with them and resonate with them. And I think that's a really important part of differentiating yourself from everyone else, or from not from everyone else, but from larger brands who have the budget. What they don't have is the ability to communicate the differentiators like that.
Yeah, well, and that's like the secret sauce of each brand then, that does it in their own way. If you follow everyone else to do it, like, because you will naturally want to get something at the end of it, which is, it's a shame to not get those images. And I think what I'm saying is I'm not saying, oh, you don't ever do them. You do them when you can actually do them, and you just split that bit down into, if you can do something that can get you selling in, that can build interest so you can be selling in 3 months. And this is as much me talking through, I'm just projecting my brain back to the screen and coming back going, oh, yeah, actually, I could be selling in 3 months rather than selling in a year. Because actually, cash is king. If I can then generate an income, or if I can generate funds incoming, you can then iterate, you can then improve, you can continue that journey from months 3.1 to 6. And if you can continue that, and then you can start growing and learning all the time, but it doesn't have to be the finished article.
No. And I think you need to be sharing all the way along, because
but it gives you something to share.
Exactly.
It gives you something to share.
Yeah.
Rather than, we'll share it when it's like the final thing. It's ready. Like, actually, yeah. When it's ready, and we'll share that image. Like, the image it'll come. I mean, it's, I'm self-therapying myself during this call as to what I'm doing, and then it becomes a bit more exciting, because I think lots of brands aren't very exciting because they're doing things in a certain way, and the small ones are, because necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? So they're like, oh wow, we can't afford to do that, but someone picks up a camera, they're half decent with it, and cameras are so good now. As Chris, my business partner, and he's a photographer, and he was showing me stuff that people are doing, and the level of technology and camera equipment now is just, I mean, it's incredible.
You've still got to have an eye for it, but what you can do with, I mean, when I first started, like I was, what was it, 2018, I started the idea of vlogging. So I've been thinking about and practicing vlogging since 2018 and never really gotten to grips with it. But I had to buy, I had to buy this. So I had to buy myself a Canon 6D Mark II. And the reason I got the Mark II was because it had the flip out screen so that I could actually see myself when I was vlogging. But look at that as a setup. Like, and so that's over £1,000. That's over £1,000. That's £500. And now all of that is in my iPhone, which was just over £1,000 for an iPhone, which is everything else. And the reason I wanted to do it with a camera was so that I could have the soft focus, the shallow depth of field, which again, you're having to hold this, and it's so heavy. Whereas I can do that on cinematic mode. Okay, it's not perfect like this would be, because it's software focused rather than hardware, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's where I don't think a lot of people then know what the difference. Like, they don't. You're always playing. Maybe that is the same with product. Like, there are the people that know and the people that don't, and it needs to be good enough. And that's that's a scary. They're scared. Two words put together to make a scary phrase. Good enough, because that can mean so many different things for different people.
Doesn't feel comfortable. Well, it does. Yes, exactly. Like, and what's good enough to? It sounds like you're saying it needs as long as it's average, but you're not. You're saying as long as it hits like that, you're never going to get perfect. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's still a standard involved, all the of varying levels, and I think that's with the photography. If you're an expert in it, then you can go, well, the focus isn't right. And I have that with photographer friends, and they're like, oh, this, that, and the other, and it's like I like the image.
Yeah.
Like, you're stuck on the technicality, whereas these guys, they're moving it through. It's like, I'm sold, and you're like, yeah, but really, they can't charge that, and it's like you're just hard done by because you're not moving, like thinking about it constantly, and you still need an eye, and that's it. Chatting to this Nathan, this photographer here, he was very much like, there are good skills here, there's good infrastructure. Some things you can't, you like choose where you put those bits, because they will make the difference. Like a great editor can take an average image and make it, and take shonky footage and turn it around, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't see that in that. You might have wanted a 10-minute film, but you've got it in 30 seconds, and it's like that, or they're like, that's all we had, that's what we could do, and we've made it complete, and that's good enough. If it conveys the message, if it does the thing, then that's good enough. So I've just been thinking about photoshoots and expressing in quite different ways. I saw you today on Instagram. You got out there. You were on.
Finally published something.
You were in front of the camera. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.
But you see, I'm still hiding. Like, I'm not particularly okay. On my personal account, I spoke to the camera, and that's an interesting experiment, and I did it on purpose. So I have the edited version that I've put up, and that took me way longer than it should have. Even just that animation as it flicks through and does the 360 of my sketches, that's probably 5 or 6 hours of experimentation to get to that. Whereas if you have someone who's experienced, they just know immediately, set up the camera, these are the settings, get it done. So if you're doing stuff yourself, and by virtue of the fact that you are also designing, producing, overseeing the clothing, means that you are not going to be an expert in photography, videography, editing. You might be able to do some of it and do it to a high standard, but there will be a sacrifice somewhere. And that sacrifice for me at the moment is time. Doing it all myself in that way. But the interesting experiment is that I did the edited version on Barnfield, and on my personal account within half an hour, I put up the edited version pre-faced with clips of me talking about how I find it difficult to do, and I find it difficult to speak to the camera, that I spent way too long editing it and all that sort of stuff. It will be interesting to see, considering I have less than 1,000 followers personally and nearly 6,000 followers on Barnfield, which one gets the most engagement. So it's almost a bit of an experiment to see, and also a way of using that content to go further.
Yeah, I mean, very good.
But you don't feel like you're there.
No, but I don't feel a draw to it. I was on LinkedIn today, and for the other biz that we've got, and someone posted a piece that I wrote, and they responded back to it, and then I had various, we were joking as we were saying, like, oh, how could we respond to this? And I was like, one way was, because the person said, oh, I disagree, and I was like, one way is like, no problem, like 2-word answer, no worries, like disagree away.
Yeah, that's all right.
One option is to block them. You always have that, just delete it, and I like what they had to say, and I agree with what they say. It was just an additional thing, and you need I think it needs, for me, it needs to be finding those longer forms and writing, and it is also, but I like the fact that person was I disagree with you. Like, to me, that was a real success because
it meant that they read it.
Well, it meant that they read it, but what they were saying was, yeah, I agree with it. That's one way of looking at it. But you're in a different country, in a different place, at a different age, so you'll see it all differently. And I have no problem with that. But I preferred the writing element of it to. I'm just not there. But I don't feel a rush or a need to.
Okay. I mean, we were talking about and I think that potentially what we were talking about in terms of doing the behind the scenes stuff for a photo shoot, but not actually even producing the photos, I think that's quite conceptual. And I think that requires an understanding or a deep engagement with the way that clothing brands are working on social at the moment to kind of envision what we're talking about there. But the whole building the brand and doing the behind the scenes is the only reason I sold any jackets. If I had just appeared with the Lawrence, like ta-da, I might have sold a handful to friends and family. But as it happened, because of building the community behind the story, behind the journey, that built up enough that I sold out 50 in 36 hours. So it's a completely different story if I'd done it in a different way.
Yeah. That's also like there was no end point in it.
What do you mean?
Well, there was a point in time of you're releasing the jacket there, but in a way you've still not started. Like probably every time you start, you've still not started Barnfield, even though you've already started, because there was no end point in. Because really, you go straight to exit, and all of those things are you go straight to your 50th photo shoot when it's like 100 Barnfield stores, this, that, and the other, blah blah blah. But like everything I think my point is everything leads on to the other. Every step leads on to the next step, and often the way that we think is photo shoot one, release one, and I don't think that's the way to think about it.
I 100% agree.
And like whether it's called founder led or not, like no one ever needs to see the end result of the photo shoot because that can always be coming. Because you can still buy the product, you can still interact with it. It still exists. It's just like it's coming. Like Album never sold a pair of jeans in its first 18 months, 2 years. They were always out of stock, but our waiting list was just getting bigger and bigger. Because for some that would be like, well, we can't afford to do it, and I was just like, no, let's just keep like it's there. We put a stake in the ground that we sell this thing. We'll get there when we can afford to get there, rather than going, we can't afford to do it, so we won't even begin, and we won't try and sell something. We weren't trying to sell something. We just said, if you're interested in when we have the next batch can be first batch, last batch, third batch, seventh batch, doesn't really matter. We didn't have any batches. We just gathered names. We could afford to do what we could do. We did that. But I think it would have stopped us from even selling anything because we'd have gone down another route.
Yeah. Well, what you were selling there were signals of interest. And that when you have those signals of interest, those people signing up for a wait list, then it can give you that confidence to go, right, okay, we know that we can produce 100 pairs of jeans because we've got 4,000 people on our subscriber list or whatever.
And our point was we didn't, because we still couldn't afford to do that. We found some denim and made 14 pairs and put it in the shop. None of it wasn't calculated. I think in the way that people can try and calculate things so ruthlessly, that I think takes away some of the... Because you don't know, and you can go, oh, I've sold 4,000, but really... and it's like making to order, but we just made them and put them out. You're going to sell 14 pairs of jeans, 7 sizes, to a size. But
that story, I really like that story. There's nothing to hide there. You wanted to bring this to life. You guys wanted to bring it to life, and the way to bring it to life was you didn't have the cash behind you just to splurge and to produce a however, whatever the MOQ might have been for a larger factory, but you were able to get 14 pairs produced, and that was the seed. That was the kickstart, and that's great.
Well, no, that wasn't the seed. The seed was
Oh.
a year and a half before that when we did the photo shoot.
Okay.
And they went into our
so
mail
for
order
album,
catalogue.
I guess, it's different world, wasn't it? 2005, did you set up? Album?
2005, yeah. So there was a mail
yeah.
order catalogue with our jeans that were sold out from the get-go. But if we hadn't put a pair of jeans or any trousers in that catalogue, it would have looked really unbalanced. But we didn't have any to sell until we opened the first store, which we didn't know we were going to open at that point. Then when we opened that store, and just kind of writing it down, when we opened that store, then we were like, oh shit, we need some jeans. We need some product. We found at a factory, the guy had some denim, and then we just like cut, how many pairs can you get? And they ended up getting 14 pairs. That was it. But I think none of it was planned, but you couldn't have gone backwards and you couldn't have gone forward. Well, you can go backwards, but we couldn't go forwards in predicting this is how we're going to do it.
Sure.
We knew what we wanted to do, but I think you can then apply that to a photo shoot and go, you're not going to see those images for 2 years, but you're going to see all the workings behind it, but you can still sell from all those workings. But I think people feel if we can't do it, we don't do it. If we can't afford it, we won't do it. And then that stops you from doing a lot, doesn't it? It's like if we can't, I think with the founder-led stuff, I equate that to someone going, well, just sell something. You've got to sell something. And you're like, yeah, I don't know what to sell. You've got to have that like, okay, I'm going to sell this. And that's like the founder-led thing of...
So you're selling you, then. You're selling the founder, I guess.
Possibly. Yeah. Like, and then it's kind of iterating. But you've got to feel comfortable with that thing. I, as a person, can't go and sell something that I'm not comfortable with selling.
No, totally.
So getting in front of a camera to sell, to be founder-led when I'm like, I'm not there yet, doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It will happen when the right time is to happen. Yeah,
and when it feels comfortable. And I do think that if somebody else is filming, it's not we're filming James, full stop. We're filming James and his journey. We're filming the journey, and James is part of that. That feels much more comfortable.
So that's easy, but it's like this.
It's a different thing, really. Isn't it?
Yeah. Like I've found this conversation is so easy. It might be waffle for some people listening, but it's so easy because I have you to talk to, and vice versa. Otherwise, it's like you've got to come up with this list or that list. Well, I haven't really been doing anything interesting that day.
Part of why I'd say we haven't done the intro videos yet. And this will mess people up because obviously we'll do the intros and record that, and that may be the first thing they've come across. But that's because we need to plan that. We need to figure out what are the questions we're going to ask each other to make sure that we're bringing out each other's story, and it needs more planning. And the off-the-cuff stuff feels so much more comfortable.
Isn't the introduction always written at the end?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, isn't it? It's more. I guess it's like when you wrote an essay at school, and then you do the summary, and then move it to the top.
Yeah, and then
true.
Like we sort of can't get there before going round the houses, and it'll be interesting, like that, because these are in a way, they'll go out. The introduction there, that opening one will be number 1, but like you say, it'll be like this will be like number 3. And then they'll be like, what? Whereas really, it should be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 intro, if it's sequential.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and that's the way it will be. But I tell you what I was just thinking then. I think it'd be one thing that'd be really useful for people is. So I recently was speaking to a videographer about doing a one-day shoot that then would turn into a 30-second up to 1 minute 30 maximum brand video. And I think what would be useful for people to know is that that one videographer at a good rate is £500 a day. You need two to capture the different angles and for the setup, and at least so that at a minimum you need two photographers, so that's £1,000 for the day of photography, videography, and then probably about 4 days worth of editing, and that's more like £400 a day. So you're looking at £2,600 for a 30-second to 1 minute 30-second brand video. So I think that's quite useful for people to know, because we can talk about, minimizing your costs and keeping things affordable, but there is still an amount that you have to spend. So if that needs to be done, and I think that a founder-led introduction video or a brand video, not the founder-led fly on the wall stuff that we've been talking about, because I actually don't know the costs of what that would be. Ideally, you need someone on full time who's just following you around all the time just to produce that level of content to tell the story. So it may look cheaper, but it's not, because it needs to be filmed and edited and put out. It's just not as polished. So you've got, say, £2,600 in videography and editing. Then you've got the clothes that need to be produced for that shoot. If you're using models, you've got to produce them in their sizes, and then you've got the model fees. Then any studio costs or props, cars, motorbikes, whatever it is that you need to include, you've got those costs as well. So I think you're looking probably at about £5,000 here anyway for your baseline costs for producing a slick, polished brand video. And I think that's just quite useful for people to know, because this stuff is very often gate-kept. Gate-kept? Yeah, I'm going with that as a word. Yeah. Like, I don't know whether you got onto costs at all in Portugal yet as to photography.
We haven't. And next call I will, because we're going to go and look at a couple of studios, and Nathan's got a list. And then it's, that usual founder stuff of how good is someone that, selling the dream that someone wants to do that for. There are all the things that happen, aren't they? Like I said to a factory, it's like, I'm going to lean on you guys, and I work with them in other ways, but I was like, I'm going to lean on you for production, and I have their relationships I have, so so I can, but I'm always like honest about it. And it's like, look, I'm going to lean on you, like you've been leaning on me. To help you, I'm going to lean on you, like I'm going to call in.
What do you mean by
favors.
leaning on them? Like in terms of like costs, or in terms of responsibility?
Yeah. Well, both costs and responsibility.
Okay.
It's like, and you will, not you will in a dictatorial sense, but you will support me because we work really well together, and it's going to work. But they're all the parts that often they're not. I think my point is always that everything can feel so overwhelming when you start something that there's no way through. And the purpose of being a founder is to find a way through. And sometimes you can do it through lying and not paying people, or you can be really honest. And my experience is people will give you a chance if you're honest and open and really upfront, and let them say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rather than getting partway through the process and then being like, right, here's your invoice. Why haven't you paid it?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got to be honest. One of the things that I do is that I rarely wait more than 48 hours to pay an invoice. When I get an invoice through from one of my suppliers, I pay it immediately. And that in part is because I want them to know that they can trust me through and through. And they know, yeah, it's worth the extra effort of working with Mark, because he is a pain in the ass, because no, that waist isn't cinched in quite enough. It needs to be another centimeter, or, like, I am very particular. And so I don't think you can be an ass and not pay. So I'm like, no, my role in this is to pay you, is to cover that straight away. You've done the work. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bang, there's your payment. And and then hopefully you'll get that support back. So I think that these are all things that you learn through doing business and through experience. And I think that there's so much information out there at the moment, like obviously TikTok being TikTok or Instagram, the algorithm, as you start to engage with things, then they're like, okay, have more. And there's a guy called Oren that I follow on TikTok, and he does a lot about like how to brand for luxury clothing brands, or his 5 production houses you could work with as a small business or whatever. He's putting out some good information. But having engaged with him, then there's just this waterfall or this slew of like other consultants out there. But 9.99999 times out of 10, they're talking to people who are taking blank t-shirts and putting a print on them. And there's no discussion about differentiating with those people. And I think that it's unfair, because it's boiling the business down to production and just being like, you can buy a blank t-shirt and you can get it printed here, and then look at Cole Buxton, you can be just like those guys. And it's just missing all of the understanding of, no, it's how you deal with the factories. It's identifying who's going to work well with you, who you're going to work well as a relationship with, and all those elements that are just completely missing from that information that's being shared.
Yeah. I mean, knowledge, information, wisdom, or information, knowledge, wisdom, those three are, information is 10 a penny, isn't it? It really is. Wisdom's when you've done it and come through the other side to whatever degree you have. Social's full of information, they're just different ways of doing it, aren't they? And everything is different, and you only know through doing it. I think the it's about finding a way through whatever it is and wherever you're from.
But that's the key, is what you just said. It's about that. It's about doing. It's about taking the action. And I think 9 times out of 10, people are too stuck in research mode and trying to protect themselves from losing money. Fair enough. Failing in various other ways if they're worried about how they might come across to other people. All those things that can hold you back from taking action and kind of living in your dreams instead of. Because again, there was another guy that I did an interview with, a guy called Frederick, who used to make beautiful cafe races over in Sweden, and I remember him saying, sometimes I don't take action because it's easier to live in my dreams, and if I take action and it doesn't go well, I lose that spark and that fuel. And so I'm like, it was really quite insightful of him to see it that way, knowing like I'm held back from taking action because I don't want to fail, because it's much easier just to be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing, this dream, rather than trying to make it happen and it not working. But if you don't take action, nothing moves forwards, and you don't get to pivot, and you don't get to learn.
Yeah. Do you? This is I think that's a valid. Of course, it's a valid point, and I like that idea. Then I thought I work quite slowly, and then I'm really fast. And usually, in my experience, that's kind of caught people out, because people then think I'm lazy, and then all of a sudden I've done something, and they're like, "We weren't ready for it."
Where did that come from?
Yeah. Like moving to Portugal, I've said many things, and then all of a sudden it was like, we're moving to Portugal next week or next month, and people are like, well, what do you mean? I think it's like, capable, highly capable, but then doesn't necessarily do what he says, and then we've gone, and it was like, and then I return back to England, and most people are doing exactly the same thing they were 4 or 5 years ago, and we've moved on, and I never thought anything different of me. I never thought I wouldn't do something like that. There was always a confidence and a belief that it would happen. So, same with same with peace, and I don't know if you're that way. Like I will, if we've got an hour, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about what to do and 5 minutes. So I just have to do the thing rather than the other way around. And some good friends who was traveling with the other week, it was like straight out of the gate, they've gone one direction. And then it's like after 10 minutes with absolute authority, and they're like, do you know where we're going? And then you got another 10-minute walk back. And I'm always like, stand, orientate myself, move in the direction I'm going, and they're like, they've checked every door. No more or less valid, but it's like, I'm not so tired after an hour of checking every door. I've just gone through the door. I've just waited and gone, well, I'm going to go on that one. But with peace, I just have complete belief, and I don't feel it's delusional. It's just like, it will happen. It will happen when I'm ready to make that move. I might have a bit more ground to catch up on, for sure. It might not be as big as other brands, and it maybe never been destined to be as big as those, but it will get there, and it will be done in my way. Do you have those feelings? Because I think it's very easy when you have that. It's like never quite believe that you're going to get there in the first place, which then makes dreams easier to live in dreams rather than like I mean it's happened. Like for me, peace has happened. I'm just going to go and roll out the thing, and there are some bits that I can't, like the founder-led stuff. I remember saying to you, I can't imagine certain bits, and then it's like, cool, I can now imagine it, and we can roll it forward. I can now imagine it, and it happens very fast when I can imagine it.
Yeah.
When I can't imagine it, I can't do it.
There might be a reason that you can't imagine it, and it might be literally that you're like, well, a day in the life right now is primarily me sat behind a computer researching or planning, and when I'm actually which is fine, which is interesting though. You forget that is interesting to people. That's how you're living your life, and if you're talking to the camera, taking the kids to school and talking about, well, I'm going to drop the kids off and then I'm going over to a production house to go and check out that, or it doesn't have to be a half an hour video. It could be a minute long. But that's kind of by the by. Yes, I have absolute belief in Barnfield because I have this idea, like, I think if my dream was to create a business that was like $1 billion business and it was international and I had retail stores all over the place, that would be too overwhelming for me it's too big a jump from where I am to where I would need to be. And I would just, they say anxiety, it comes from the difference between reality and expectation. And so I would just be a dribbling mess if that was my plan. But I genuinely want Barnfield to be a small but influential company. And when I talk about it being small, I don't mean that it's a micro business and that I'm struggling to make a living. That's not what it needs to be for me. I want it to be sustainable, and I want to have a standard of living that I want. Now, that's not to say that I'm buying yachts and apartments around the world and all that sort of stuff. No, it's about having the income, and as you were saying, not just the revenue, but the profit that I can put back into creative things, that I can take the money out of it so that I can live a life that keeps me happy, but that there's this spare cash there that I can put into it and do the creative video shoots and the photo shoots and use it as a platform. And I don't think that I would be where I am now, which is having launched the Lawrence in May 23, delivering it October 23. We're now in July 24, and I'm yet to sell another product because I've been setting the foundations up. If I didn't have that belief, I would have dropped it by now. So I think you have to have that belief because it's difficult. It's a roller coaster ride. So if you don't have that belief, as soon as you hit a hurdle, you'd be like, I'm out. So, but you go and do the school run.
We'll talk about belief next time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, enjoy yourself, and we'll catch up. I really want to talk about your experience with retail as well, because we've done a lot of digital talk.
Okay.
And I think retail will be really interesting for people.
Yeah,
So
great.
let's dig into that next time.
Yeah, lovely. I'll send these
All
over
right.
shortly. All right.
Cool.
Cheers, Mark.
All right.
Bye.
Catch you soon. Bye bye.